Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon, gray sky outside. The kind of light that makes everything feel slightly unreal, like you're living inside a memory that hasn't quite decided how it's going to end. I'm sitting at a table, a real table, not a folding one in a spare bedroom, not a kitchen counter I cleared off just so I'd have somewhere to work. A real, solid conference table in a room that has my name on the door. And across from me, extending his hand with that particular smile that people say for when they realize they've miscalculated something important, is the man who rejected me. Not once, not twice, 4 times. He's saying something about how he always believed in me, how he knew I had it in me all along, how they would have loved to have been part of this journey. And here's what I did. I didn't flip the table. I didn't deliver a speech I'd rehearsed in the shower for 3 years. I didn't list every condescending email, every form letter rejection, every closed door. I just smiled. Warm, genuine, completely at peace. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about the moment you've been waiting for. By the time it actually arrives, you don't need it anymore. I had already won, long before he walked into that room, long before the company grew, long before any of it became visible to the outside world. I won the moment I decided that his opinion of me would never again be the ceiling of my life. My name is Jordan, and this is a story of how they rejected my application 4 times, and I built the exact thing they kept rejecting me for. This took 4 years. It cost me 2 relationships, 1 apartment, about $27,000 in personal savings, and more sleepless nights than I can honestly count. And it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Stay with me, because this story isn't just mine. This channel is for the people sitting with a rejection letter right now. The ones who've been told no so many times that they've started to wonder if no is just their permanent address. This story isn't about revenge. It's about becoming. It's about what happens when you stop trying to prove something to someone else and start building something for yourself. Something so real, so solid, so undeniably yours that the people who once dismissed you don't even register on your radar anymore. If that's the journey you're on or the one you're about to start, hit subscribe. New stories every week. Long ones, honest ones, the kind that don't skip the hard parts. All right, let's go back to the beginning. I need to tell you something about who I was at 26, because if you only see where I ended up, you might think this story was inevitable, that I had something special, that it was only a matter of time. It wasn't. At 26, I was the kind of person who apologized for taking up space. Literally, I would physically step out of someone's way on the sidewalk before they even came close to me. I had been conditioned in ways I didn't fully understand yet to make myself smaller, quieter, less. I grew up in a mid-sized city in the Midwest, the kind of place where ambition is considered suspicious if it points too far outside the zip code. My dad worked at a distribution warehouse for 22 years. My mom did bookkeeping for a church and 2 small businesses. They were good, hard people. They loved me. But the world they showed me had visible edges, and I'd been taught, without anyone ever quite saying it, to respect those edges. I graduated college with a communications degree and a 3.1 GPA. Not spectacular, not embarrassing, perfectly, frustratingly average. I went to work at a marketing agency, entry level. I was doing content for companies that sold industrial cleaning equipment and one particularly joyless line of ergonomic office chairs. It paid $38,000 a year. I told myself it was a starting point. But here's the thing about starting points. They only feel like starting points if you actually start moving. And for 2 years, I didn't move. I stayed in that job, in that apartment, in that life, while something inside me grew louder and louder until I couldn't sleep properly anymore. It started with a podcast. I know that sounds cliche. Bear with me. I was driving home from work on a Thursday night. It was March, it was cold, and I was eating a drive-thru burrito with one hand while navigating rush hour traffic. And I was listening to this podcast about content businesses. about people who had built membership communities, courses, newsletters, about people who had taken specific expertise and turned it into something that supported their lives entirely. And something happened in my chest. Not inspiration exactly, something more urgent than that, like a smoke alarm going off in a room you didn't know was burning. Because I had been sitting on something for months. I'd noticed a gap, a real, specific, market-sized gap in how small nonprofits handled their communications and donor storytelling. I'd been doing volunteer work for a local food bank, helping them with their newsletter, and I realized these organizations were starving for content help, but couldn't afford agencies. The freelancers who understood nonprofit culture were rare. The tools built for enterprise companies were bloated and expensive and designed for people with entire marketing departments. There was no platform, no community, no resource hub built specifically for communication staff at small and mid-sized nonprofits. I saw it so clearly I could barely breathe. I started sketching the idea. A membership platform, resources, templates, training, a community space, a place where a communications coordinator at a food bank or a literacy organization could come and actually get what they needed. I built a scrappy prototype over 4 weekends. I wrote a 15-page business plan. I put together a pitch deck, 32 slides, color-coded with market research I'd done at 11 p.m. on my laptop while my roommate watched television in the next room. And then I applied. There was an accelerator program in my city, competitive, well-respected, specifically for early-stage social impact ventures. They provided $25,000 in seed funding, 6 months of mentorship, office space, and access to a network that could actually move things forward. I applied in October. The application took me 3 weeks. I submitted it at 11:47 p.m. on the deadline night because I kept rewriting the section about market size. The rejection came 11 days later. Form email, 12 lines. They wished me well in my entrepreneurial journey. I printed it out, stared at it for about 4 minutes, and then told myself, okay, that was round 1. You didn't expect to win round 1. I applied to a second program, a national fellowship for emerging social entrepreneurs. 6 months of applications, recommendations, interviews. I made it to the semi-final round. I flew to Chicago on a Thursday, gave the best presentation of my life up to that point, shook hands with the panel, flew home Friday morning, and got back to work. 2 weeks later, rejected. Kindly this time, one of the panelists sent a personal note saying they'd been impressed with the concept, but felt I needed more demonstrated traction. That word, traction, would haunt me for the next 2 years. The third rejection is the one that actually broke something. There was a man, I'll call him Robert, who ran the regional division of a larger foundation that funded early-stage social ventures. Robert was polished, well-connected, the kind of person who had framed photos on his office wall with himself and local politicians. He was known as a champion of social innovation. He gave keynote talks about finding the next generation of community leaders. I met him at a networking event. We talked for 40 minutes. He asked to see my pitch deck. He told me, and I remember this precisely, he said this was exactly the kind of gap they'd been looking for someone to fill. I sent the full materials the next morning. He passed them to his team. His team scheduled a call. I had 3 calls over 6 weeks. I revised the plan twice based on their feedback. I built out a financial model. I brought in a letter of support from the food bank. And then Robert sent me an email. 2 paragraphs. The gist? The committee had decided the concept was promising but premature. They wanted to see a proven model before committing. They'd be happy to revisit if I made progress. I closed my laptop. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office building for 45 minutes, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding together for 18 months. Because here's what Robert didn't know. He didn't know that I had drained my savings account by $6,000 building the prototype. He didn't know that I'd taken on a freelance side project that paid poorly and killed my weekends just so I could keep working on this. He didn't know that my girlfriend at the time had started calling it the project you love more than me. Half joking, half not.
He didn't know that I was 32 days away from my 28th birthday, sitting in a parking lot, genuinely asking myself whether I was delusional. But here's the thing he also didn't know, and this is the part I need you to hear. The word no had never actually stopped me from believing the idea was real. Even in that parking lot, even crying, which I was, even with 6,000 gone and a relationship fraying and a day job I was quietly suffocating in, the ideal was still real. The gap was still real. The people who needed this were still out there. And that's the thing about a genuine idea, a real one, not a fantasy, but an actual solution to an actual problem. It doesn't stop being true just because someone doesn't fund it. I drove home. I ordered Thai food. I watched television I can't remember. And somewhere around midnight, I opened my laptop and started revising the plan.
The fourth rejection came from a program I almost didn't apply to. It was another regional accelerator, smaller than the first, less prestigious, honestly not even my top choice. But someone had encouraged me to apply, and I thought, what's one more? This time, I made it to the final round. 5 finalists, 3 would be selected. I did my presentation, I felt good about it, I answered every question clearly. One of the judges, a woman named Patricia who ran a regional consulting firm, told me afterward that my understanding of the nonprofit communications market was genuinely impressive. 2 weeks later, rejected. But this time, they offered feedback calls, optional. I accepted immediately. The feedback call was 15 minutes. The program director, I'll call him David, was professional, efficient. He told me the committee felt the market was too niche, that the revenue model was unclear, that without demonstrated paying customers, it was hard to justify the risk. And then he said something. He said, "Honestly, Jordan, this might just be an idea that's ahead of its time." Ahead of its time. I have thought about those words so many times since, because what he meant, I could hear it clearly, was that this is a nice idea that will probably never work. What he didn't understand was what those words actually did to me. They didn't crush me, they freed me. Because ahead of its time doesn't mean wrong, it means early. And I realized, sitting on that call, with my notepad open and 4 rejection letters in my folder and $11,000 left in savings and nothing to show for 2 years of work, I realized that I had been trying to get someone else to validate something I already knew was true. And that was the problem. Not the idea, not the market, not the timing. The problem was that I had outsourced my belief. And that was the last time I ever did that. And that's when everything started to change. It was a Sunday in February. Outside, snow. Inside, my apartment, which was a 1-bedroom I shared with an anxious rescue dog named Pickles and 4 boxes of notebooks I kept telling myself I'd organize. I had been home from the feedback call for 6 days. I'd gone to work, done my job, come home, fed the dog, gone to sleep. I was moving through my own life like I was watching it from slightly outside my body. And that Sunday, I sat down with a legal pad. Not my laptop, not an app, a physical legal pad. And I wrote a question at the top. What would I do if I stopped waiting for permission? I wrote for 3 hours. Not a business plan, not a pitch deck, just honest answers to that question. Stream of consciousness. Some of it embarrassing, some of it surprisingly clear. And what emerged from those 3 hours was a decision that was so simple it almost made me laugh. If no one was going to fund this idea, if everyone kept saying, prove it first, then I was going to prove it first. Not with investors' money, not with an accelerator's blessing, my own. I was going to build a small, real, working version of this platform. I was going to charge for it. I was going to find 10 paying members, and I was going to do it in 90 days. Not to impress David or Robert or any of the panels I'd stood in front of. For myself. Because here's what I finally understood on that Sunday in February. I had been building a business plan to show other people, and I had never once just built the thing. That night,
I didn't sleep much, but it was a different kind of awake, not the anxious kind, the planning kind, the this is actually real kind. I want to be honest about the next 6 months because this is the part of the story that doesn't make the highlight reel, the part that feels invisible when you're inside it. And it's the part that actually determined everything that came after. I kept my day job. I had to. I had $11,000 in savings and a dog and a lease and a very real understanding that righteous pivots do not pay rent. But I restructured my life around the principle that I borrowed from a book and made my own. Protect the hours. Here's what that looked like. I woke up at 5:15 a.m. every weekday. The alarm went off and I got up. Not eventually, not after snoozing. I got up, made coffee, and worked on the platform from 5:30 to 7:30 a.m. That was sacred time. 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, before the rest of my life started. Lunch breaks? I ate at my desk and used 30 minutes to respond to potential members I was recruiting, do market research, or write content. Evenings? 2 nights a week, another 2 hours. Weekends? 6 to 8 hours total, spread across both days. This wasn't dramatic. It wasn't montage-worthy. It was deeply unglamorous. Some mornings the alarm went off at 5:15 and I stared at the ceiling and thought, this is insane. You are building something no one believes in. Go back to sleep. I got up anyway, because here's the truth about discipline that I've come to understand. It's not a personality trait you either have or don't have. It's a decision you make before you're tired, so you don't have to make it when you are. I decided on that Sunday in February what kind of person I was going to be. And then, every morning at 5:15, I just honored that decision. That's it. That's the whole secret. There's no trick. Just honor the decision. I want to give you the specifics because I think the specifics matter. By week 3, I had a functional MVP, a minimum viable platform. It wasn't beautiful. It was a Notion workspace and the private community hub and a Gumroad page. Scrappy doesn't cover it. It looked like what it was, something built at 5:30 a.m. by a person who was terrified and determined in equal measure. By week 6, I had recruited my first 10 paying members. How? I found them where they already lived. I joined nonprofit communications Facebook groups. There are several large ones, tens of thousands of members. I started answering questions, genuinely, helpfully, without any promotion. I wrote a free resource guide and posted it. People shared it. I started a weekly email digest, free, specifically for nonprofit communication staff. I positioned myself not as someone with a platform to sell, but as someone who deeply understood their specific daily underfunded problems. By week 6, 10 paying members at $29 per month. That was $290 per month. I know that doesn't sound like much. It wasn't. But let me tell you what $290 per month actually meant to me in that moment. It meant real people had opened their wallets. Real people had decided my work was worth something. Real people were using what I'd built and finding value in it. No panel had given me that. No application committee had voted me worthy. 10 human beings had simply paid money for a thing I made. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the notification on my phone for a long time. And then I went back to work. I want to be real with you here because I think these stories sometimes skip over the actual texture of the grind, and I don't want to do that to you. Month 2, I hit a wall. Growth stalled at 12 members. I couldn't figure out why. I started second-guessing the pricing, the positioning, the entire concept. I rewrote my welcome email 4 times in 1 week. I spent a whole Saturday morning in an anxiety spiral on my bathroom floor. Pickles sitting next to me looking worried. What I did, I emailed every single one of my 12 members and asked them one question. What would make this platform indispensable for you? 9 of them responded. Their answers completely redirected my roadmap. The templates they needed most were not the ones I'd built first. The community didn't need another Slack. They needed structured learning. The thing I thought was my main offering was actually the thing they valued least. I threw out 2 months of work and rebuilt around what they actually wanted. Month 3, a member publicly complained in the community that a resource was outdated and not worth the money. Someone else agreed. The thread got awkward. Instead of defensively shutting it down, I responded, thanked them for the feedback, updated the resource within 24 hours, announced the update publicly, and gave those 2 members an extra month free. Both of them became my most vocal advocates. Their relationship ended. I won't go deep into this, it's not her story to tell, but my girlfriend and I broke up in month 4 of this period. It wasn't dramatic, it was sad. She wasn't wrong that I had prioritized this work, I had. But I had also changed in ways that our relationship couldn't accommodate, and she needed someone whose presence was more consistent than mine was during that season. I took a week where I barely worked. I let myself grieve it honestly, and then I came back, because the work had become something I needed, not for distraction, but for purpose. That distinction mattered. Here's something I think about a lot. How do you carry the rejection forward without letting it poison what you're building? Because it would have been easy, so easy, to build this entire thing as a monument to proving those committees wrong. To let Robert's 2-paragraph email and David's ahead of its time and every form letter be the fuel.
The problem with that fuel is where it burns. It burns toward other people. And when you're building toward other people, toward their recognition, their regret, their eventual acknowledgement, you handed them the steering wheel again. What I learned slowly over those 6 months was to separate the information in the rejection from the wound in the rejection. The information, I needed demonstrated traction. I needed paying customers. I needed proof. That was useful. I used it. The wound, the feeling of being dismissed, of not being seen, of someone deciding in 30 minutes what I was capable of. That was real. I felt it fully. I talked about it with a therapist I started seeing in month 3, best $150 a month I've ever spent, and I processed it there, not in my work. The work was for the work. The healing was for me. Those 2 things, kept separate, made both of them work better. I stopped fantasizing about the moment David or Robert would see what I'd built. I stopped writing speeches in my head. I stopped rehearsing witty responses to imagined apologies. I just worked. And something happened when I stopped carrying the weight of their opinions. I got faster. I got clearer. I made better decisions. Because I was no longer building for an audience of critics. I was building for the people who had actually paid me $29. And that's when everything started to change. Month 4, 31 members. Month 5, 58 members. Month 6, 94 members. I remember the night we hit 100. I was at my kitchen table at 6:45 a.m. on a Wednesday. The notification came in, I looked at it for a second, put down my coffee, went over to the couch and buried my face in Pickle's fur for about 90 seconds. Then I went back to work. But something had shifted. Not in the platform, in me. Because 100 people paying $29 a month is almost $3,000 a month in recurring revenue. That's real. That's a number that changes the conversation you can have with yourself about what's possible. More importantly, 100 people is a community. It has its own gravity. Members were talking to each other, sharing resources, collaborating across organizations. Someone in Denver connected with someone in Portland, and they built a communications toolkit together that they shared with the whole group. A member in Nashville got a job she'd been trying to land for 2 years, partly because of a reference from another member. The platform was doing what I had always known it could do. It was solving a real problem. Here's what the numbers don't capture. At some point during those 6 months, I can't pinpoint exactly when, I stopped feeling like someone trying to become something and started feeling like the thing itself. It's subtle, hard to describe, but it's the difference between wearing a costume and wearing your own clothes. I started walking differently, not because I'd worked on my posture or done affirmations in the mirror, I did not do affirmations in the mirror, but because I had evidence, real evidence that I could build something from nothing, that my instincts about a market were correct, that people would pay for what I made.
Confidence built on evidence is a completely different animal from confidence built on wishful thinking. At my day job, my manager commented that I seemed different. She meant it as a compliment. I was contributing more in meetings, pitching ideas more directly, pushing back constructively when I disagreed. I'd been working there for 3 years and had spent most of that time being pleasant and unremarkable. I got a raise I hadn't asked for because I had stopped acting like someone who was hoping they'd be appreciated and started acting like someone who knew their value.
I want to be clear. I hadn't changed my personality. I was still me, still the person who apologized to strangers on sidewalks, still the person who over-explained things and made too many jokes in uncomfortable situations. But there was a core of me now that was solid in a way it hadn't been before. And that solidity changed everything around it. Month 8, I was invited to speak on a podcast about nonprofit marketing. Small show, maybe 4,000 listeners. I said yes. The episode went up. Within 48 hours, 22 new members joined. Month 9, a nonprofit technology consultant featured my platform in her newsletter. 8,000 subscribers. 53 new members in 4 days. Month 10, I was making $7,400 a month in recurring revenue. I need to pause on that number because it's the number that changed the practical calculus of my life. $7,400 a month was, after taxes, roughly equivalent to what I was making at my day job. I had built, in 10 months at 5:30 a.m., a thing that matched my full-time income. I gave 4 weeks' notice on a Tuesday. My manager asked why. I told her I'd built something and it was time. She looked at me for a moment and then said, "Honestly, I'm not surprised. Good luck." I walked out of that building on my last day and sat in my car and thought, I have no salary. I have no benefits. I have a dog and an apartment and a membership platform and 268 people who are counting on me to keep building. And I felt more stable than I had in 4 years. This is the part of the story where the social world starts to shift. Because when you transform quietly, there's a lag. The people who knew the old version of you, the apologetic one, the one who asked for permission, the one who applied for things and got turned down, they hold on to that version longer than the reality warrants. And then, at some point, the gap between who you've become and who they remember gets too large to ignore. My college roommate, someone I'd stayed loosely in touch with, texted me out of nowhere to say he'd seen my name mentioned in a nonprofit trade publication. He seemed genuinely surprised, like, how did you get in there? Mutual friends started asking about the platform at more volume. People who'd been politely supportive became suddenly more interested when the receipts became visible. And here's what I noticed. I didn't need the interest. I appreciated it, but it didn't change anything. That was new. There was a time when external validation was the thing I was working toward, when the goal was for people to see, to acknowledge, to recognize. But somewhere in those 10 months of 5:30 a.m. mornings, I had become someone who simply didn't require that anymore. I was genuinely happy to share what I was building. I was genuinely proud. But the approval of the people around me had stopped being the purpose. That internal shift, detachment from external validation, is not something anyone handed me. It's not a technique or a mindset hack. It grew organically from one thing, doing work that mattered, consistently, for a long enough time that my identity became rooted in the doing rather than the recognition. Let me give you the year 1 numbers because I promise specifics. Members at 12 months, 412. Monthly recurring revenue, $12,948. Total revenue year 1, roughly $89,000. Hours per week working on the platform after leaving the day job, full-time, roughly 45 to 50 hours. I had also launched a free resource library with over 60 templates and guides, built a mentorship matching program within the community, started a quarterly virtual conference. The first one drew 340 attendees, been featured in 4 podcasts and 3 newsletters, and hired my first contractor, a part-time community manager. And here's the one that matters most to me personally. I had received 47 messages from members telling me that this platform had materially changed their work. One woman told me she had finally been able to make the case for a communications budget at her organization using a template from the platform. She got $15,000 approved that her organization had never had before. That is why I built this. Not the revenue, not the recognition, not the moment I was heading toward where a certain man would extend his hand across a table. The woman who got the $15,000. And that's when everything started to change. Let me fast forward a little because this story deserves its full context. By month 18, the platform had grown in ways I genuinely hadn't projected. 600 members, then 800. At the 2-year mark, 1,100 paying members at a tiered pricing structure. $29 a month for individual, $79 a month for organizational, with a new enterprise tier for networks of nonprofits that brought in $500 a month. Annual recurring revenue crossed $400,000 in year 2. I moved out of my apartment into a slightly less chaotic apartment. I hired 2 full-time team members. I brought on a part-time CFO on contract. I partnered with a national nonprofit association to offer platform access to their member organizations as a benefit. And this is the one that made me sit very quietly for a while. I was invited to speak at a national conference on nonprofit communications and technology. Not as a guest, not on a panel, as a keynote speaker. I stood on that stage in front of 800 people and I thought, 26 months ago, I was eating a burrito in my car in rush hour traffic, listening to a podcast about people who'd done something like this. And I could not have imagined myself here. Not because I didn't believe in the idea. I always believed in the idea. I couldn't have imagined myself here because I hadn't yet met the version of myself that built it. That person didn't exist yet. You have to build the idea to become the person who built it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's the truest thing I know. The first encounter happened at a regional social innovation summit. I was there as a speaker, a presenter on the main stage, talking about sustainable revenue models for platform businesses in the social sector. I'd been introduced as the founder of a platform I'd built from scratch, now serving over 1,000 nonprofits across the country. I was backstage doing a mic check when I heard a familiar voice. Robert. He was there as a sponsor. His foundation had underwritten part of the event. I recognized him before he recognized me. He'd aged slightly, more gray at the temples, same polished presentation. He was talking to someone across the room with that particular ease that comes from decades of being in rooms where people know your name. I had a choice in that moment. I could have avoided him. I could have arranged my schedule to not be in the same hallway. Some part of me had spent 3 years imagining this moment as a confrontation, the big reveal, the quiet triumph. Instead, I walked over. "Robert," I said. He turned, looked at me. I watched his face go through something, recognition loading slowly, like a browser on a bad connection. "Jordan," he said. "Jordan," and then it clicked. I could see it. "Oh, wow, I heard this is your platform, isn't it? The nonprofit communications one?" "It is," I said. He smiled, warm, professional. And then, and this is the part I want you to really hear, he said he'd always thought that was a great idea, and he was so glad someone ran with it. Someone ran with it. I looked at him for a moment, and I felt nothing dramatic, not the flood of vindication I'd imagined, not the urge to list every date, every email, every feedback call, not the urge to remind him what he'd actually told me. I felt something quieter, almost like compassion, not for what he'd done, for the gap between what he thought he was saying and what he was actually saying, because he genuinely didn't remember. Or he did, and he'd reframed it so thoroughly that the reframe was now his reality. And what was I going to do with that? Correct him? Reconstruct the paper trail? Make him feel small in a hotel hallway? I had a lot of help along the way, I said, which was true. We talked for maybe 7 minutes. He asked smart questions about the platform. He said his foundation was looking to support more infrastructure work in the sector, and would I be open to a conversation? I gave him my business card. and then I walked to the stage for my keynote. David was different. I ran into him about 6 months later at a different event, a smaller gathering, more intimate, focused on early-stage social ventures. He was there in his same role, evaluating a new cohort of applicants. I was there as a guest speaker, invited to talk to the applicants about what the first 2 years of building actually look like. He found me during the break. Jordan, he was more nervous than Robert had been. I wanted to say, I followed what you've built, and I wanted to say that I think we made a mistake. I wasn't prepared for that, because Robert had shown me what denial looked like, and David was showing me something different, accountability. I appreciate that, I said, and I meant it. The feedback I gave you about market size, I think I was wrong, or at least I was applying the wrong framework. We weren't thinking about the underserved market, we were thinking about ceiling size. He paused. Would you ever consider talking to our current cohort? Informally. Your story is exactly what they need to hear. I looked at him. I thought about 28-year-old me in that parking lot. I thought about the Sunday with the legal pad. I thought about the 5:15 a.m. alarm. I thought about the woman who got her $15,000 budget approved. Yeah, I said, I'd be glad to. The conversation with David's cohort happened 3 weeks later. 8 founders in a conference room. Early stage, nervous. The particular energy of people who believe in something deeply and are not sure the world will agree. I sat at the table, not at the head of it, just at the table, and I told them this story. Not as a triumph narrative, not as proof that rejection is always a stepping stone, not with a tidy moral. I told it the way I've told it to you, honestly, with the parking lot and the legal pad and the therapy and the 5:30 a.m. mornings and the anxiety spiral on the bathroom floor. And I watched something happen in that room. One woman, maybe 25, building a platform for first-generation college students, started crying quietly, not in a despairing way, in the way people cry when something they've been carrying alone suddenly has company. She said she keeps getting told to prove it first, and she doesn't know how to prove it without the resources. I said, you build the smallest real version you can build, and you build it for the person who needs it, not for the committee that might fund it. And I realized sitting in that room that this was the purpose of everything that had happened to me. Not the revenue, not the keynote, not Robert's handshake or David's apology. This moment. This woman, this specific exchange in this specific conference room between 2 people who understood what it cost to believe in something no one had validated yet. The rejection didn't break me. It built me into someone who could sit in that room and mean every word. I want to say something about Robert and David and every committee that told me no, because I don't want to end their part of the story without honesty. They weren't villains. They were people doing a hard job with limited information, filtering hundreds of applications through frameworks designed for the median case. They were managing risk on behalf of organizations that had their own constraints and stakeholders and definitions of success. They were also wrong about me. Both things are true. The mistake I had made was treating their no as a verdict on reality, rather than a verdict on one committee's risk calculus. Those are completely different things. A rejection from a funding committee tells you about that committee's priorities, risk tolerance, and frameworks. It tells you almost nothing about whether your idea is real. Almost nothing. The information it does contain, traction, validation, proof of concept, that's worth extracting. That's worth using. The rest of it, the implied judgment, the feeling of being found lacking, the way it shrinks you if you let it, that's not information. That's noise. The skill of my transformation, if I had to name it, was learning to separate signal from noise in a rejection, and then having the courage to act on the signal while releasing the noise. Let me tell you where things stood at the 3-year mark, because I want you to have the full picture. Members, 1,847. Annual recurring revenue, $1.1 million. Team, 6 full-time employees, 4 contractors.
Platform features: a resource library of over 300 assets, a community space, a mentorship program, a virtual conference now drawing 1,400 attendees, and a certification program for nonprofit communications professionals. And I received a grant, not from Roberts Foundation, from a national foundation focused on nonprofit infrastructure, $150,000 to expand the platform's accessibility and reduce pricing for the smallest organizations. The application process was 12 pages. I submitted it at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, not at 11:47 p.m. the night of the deadline. The approval came 6 weeks later. I read the letter at my desk, my real desk, in my real office, in the space I lease for my company. And I thought about the person I was when I wrote that first application at a kitchen table while a dog slept at my feet. And I felt toward that person something I wasn't expecting: gratitude. Gratitude for not stopping, for getting up at 5:15 a.m. when it was 14 degrees outside and there was no obvious reason to believe it would ever add up to anything. For having the stubbornness, or the faith, or the plain inability to accept the alternative to keep going. That person deserved better than what they were told. But they also did exactly what they needed to do. Here's the thing about the best revenge. I've heard that phrase my whole life. The best revenge is living well. And for a long time, I thought that meant build something impressive enough that the people who doubted you feel bad. But that's not what it means. Not really. Living well isn't a performance staged for an audience of people who once dismissed you. Living well is what happens when you stop performing entirely, when the thing you're building is genuinely for you, genuinely for the people it serves, genuinely aligned with who you actually are. Living well is getting up at 5:15 a.m. not because you're trying to outrun someone, but because you genuinely can't wait to get to the work. Living well is sitting in a conference room with a founder who's crying because she felt alone, and being able to say, "I know, me too, keep going." Living well is the $15,000 budget that one member finally got approved. The best revenge isn't living well to show them. It's living so fully and purposefully that they become irrelevant. Not because you've forgotten, but because you've outgrown the part of you that needed them to validate the truth you already knew. I want to give you something actionable before I let you go, because inspiration without tools is just entertainment. 1. Separate the information from the wound. Every rejection contains both. The information is useful. The wound is real and deserves to be processed with a therapist, in a journal, with someone you trust. But do not let the wound infect the work. Keep those two things in their separate spaces. 2. Protect the hours. You do not need to quit your job to build something. You need 2 protected hours a day. That's it. 2 hours, early morning, late night, lunch breaks, whatever works, where the work on your thing is non-negotiable, not optional, not if I have energy, non-negotiable. 2 hours a day is 730 hours a year. That is enough to build something real. 3. Build for the person, not the committee. Stop trying to build something that will impress a funder or a panel or a judge. Build the smallest, real thing that solves the real problem for the real person who has it. Get them to pay for it, even $10, even one person. Build from there. Proof of concept isn't a slideshow. It's a receipt. 4. Honor the decision before you're tired. Decide once who you're going to be during this season. Decide when you're rested and clear and motivated. Write it down. And then, when the alarm goes off at 5:15 and you're tired and nothing has worked yet, don't make the decision again. Just honor the one you already made. 5. Let the people who said no become irrelevant, not enemies. This is hard, but it matters. When you carry your rejectors with you, when you're constantly measuring your progress against their judgment, rehearsing speeches, imagining their faces when they finally see you, you're still letting them drive. You're still handing them the steering wheel. Release them. Not for their sake, for yours. Because the energy you spend on them is energy that doesn't go to your work.
and your work is the whole point. And finally, do this for yourself. Not for the moment they see you, not for the handshake across the conference table, not for the proof. Do it because the gap you see is real. Do it because the people who need what you're building are out there right now, underserved and waiting. Do it because you, at 5:15 a.m. with cold coffee and a nervous dog, and no idea if any of it will work, are the only one who can build the specific thing only you can build. Do it because you already know it's true. You've always known. 4 rejections. 4 times they read what I'd written, sat around the table, and decided, not this one. And every single time I got up, went home, revised the plan, and kept going. Not because I was fearless, not because I was exceptional, because I was stubborn enough to believe that my knowledge of what was needed was worth more than their comfort with funding what already existed. And because at some point I stopped needing them to agree. The best revenge isn't building something to show them. The best revenge is building something so real, so necessary, so undeniably yours that the question of whether they're impressed never even crosses your mind. I didn't scream, I didn't fight back. I just became someone they never expected. And that was enough. If this story found you at a moment when you needed it, when you're sitting with a rejection, or a door that won't open, or a committee that doesn't see what you see, I want to hear from you. What's your glow-up story? What are you building that the world hasn't validated yet? Tell me in the comments, every single one, because the community in the comments of this channel is full of people exactly like you, who are in the gap period right now, who are doing the quiet work, who are choosing every day to honor the decision they made when they were rested and clear. You're not alone in the 5:15 a.m. Hit subscribe if this is the kind of story you need more of. New videos every week, long ones, honest ones. And take care of yourself. The work will be there when you wake up.